They say a mother's absence leaves a hole. But holes are clean, sharp. They have edges you can trace with your fingers. Megan didn't leave a hole. She left a smudge. A faint, oily residue of a woman who once stood in our kitchen pouring juice into a boy's plastic cup and asking if I'd picked up more cereal. She left behind half a box of frozen waffles, her perfume still clinging to the hallway air, and a single toothbrush lying dry by the sink. And she left her son, Noah, without a single word. No goodbye, no note, no accident to explain. She simply evaporated. 13 years ago, I woke up and found her side of the bed cold. I didn't panic, not at first. I thought maybe she'd gone for coffee. Maybe she was walking off one of those long silences that had crept into our marriage like mold. But by noon I knew. The stillness had weight. Something had been amputated from the house. And Noah, he didn't scream. He didn't run through the rooms looking for her. He just sat on the bottom step of the staircase, backpack at his feet, waiting. I asked if he wanted breakfast. He said no. I asked if he knew where his mom went. He just stared at the wall and said, "She took the charger. My tablet's going to die." That was the first day I learned how to lie to a child. "She'll be back soon," I said. I kept saying that for months. Every time he asked. Every time he stared at the door too long. Every time he flinched at the sound of a car slowing down on our street. I told him she was busy. I told him she was figuring things out. I told him what people tell children when the truth is too brutal to feed them raw. What I didn't tell him was that she had left before, quietly, briefly, small vanishings during the early years of our marriage. Nights when she said she needed space and came back 2 days later smelling like hotel soap and stale wine. But she had always returned. This time was different. She didn't come back. Not for Christmas. Not for birthdays. Not for scraped knees or broken bones or the night Noah locked himself in the bathroom and whispered through the door, "Why doesn't she love me?" That was the first time I didn't answer. I just sat there on the hallway floor until his breathing slowed. I had to become someone I wasn't prepared to be. Not a stepfather. Not a replacement. Something closer to a custodian of memory. I had to clean up after a woman who had vanished like a ghost and left her echoes behind in a child's mouth. I stopped saying "your mom." I stopped hanging her pictures on the wall. I packed her things into boxes, then moved those boxes to the attic, then finally to the curb. I told myself it was mercy. But really, I just couldn't keep waking up to the sight of her shirts still folded neatly on the shelf. Noah was 7 when she left. He liked drawing, dinosaurs, and the sound the microwave made when it beeped. He'd press the buttons just to hear the tones. He barely spoke to other kids, and his teachers said he had trouble regulating emotions, whatever that meant. I just knew he didn't cry when he got hurt, but he wept silently when he lost a pencil he liked. I changed my hours at work, moved to the night shift. That way I could get him to school, make him lunch, be there when he got home. I didn't sleep much those first years. 4 hours a day if I was lucky. I remember standing in the kitchen once, pouring orange juice into his cup, and my hands were shaking so badly I spilled half of it on the floor. He didn't say anything, just got a rag and wiped it up. We learned to move around each other like planets in orbit. Predictable paths. No sudden gravity shifts. I packed his lunch with surgical precision, cutting the sandwiches into the shape of rectangles because triangles, he said, were too sharp. I kept all the light bulbs warm-toned because cool ones felt like hospitals. I read bedtime stories even when I could barely keep my eyes open. I sat through parent-teacher conferences filled with quiet pity from strangers who assumed I was some distant uncle forced to babysit long-term. They'd ask, "And the mother?" Always the same way. Lips pursed, voices softened. "She's not around," I'd say. Not dead. Not divorced. Just gone. As if the word itself could undo the weight of her absence. And then there were the milestones. First school play. First basketball game. First real fever that broke him into shivering sobs at 2 in the morning. I held him through all of it. I carried his weight in grocery lines and hospital waiting rooms and quiet evenings where he didn't speak but sat close enough for his shoulder to press against mine. I bought him his first bicycle. I taught him to swim. I clapped louder than any other parent at his 8th grade science fair. even though his project barely worked and the other kids laughed behind his back. I was the one who cleaned up after the nightmares. I was the one who found the note he tried to write her once. Just a single sentence on a crumpled page. I forgive you. I didn't ask what it meant. Noah never called me Dad. Not once. He called me Michael. Sometimes Mike. Occasionally, hey. But he never forgot what I wasn't. And I never reminded him what I was. He kept her picture in a shoebox. He didn't look at it often. But I knew where it was. Middle of his closet, bottom shelf, buried under art supplies and old drawings. I saw him take it out one night. He was 13. He looked at it for about 5 minutes, then put it back and didn't say a word. The next morning, he asked if I could teach him how to cook eggs. That was his way of asking for something else. Something softer. Over the years, the silence between us changed shape. It wasn't cold. It wasn't cruel. It was just cautious. He trusted me with everything but his heart. I didn't blame him. It had been broken long before I came into his life. And still, I gave him everything. Clothes, food, shelter, stability, but also presence. The thing people pretend doesn't matter when they talk about what makes a parent real. I gave him time I didn't have. Money I couldn't spare. I let him fail. I let him try again. I let him break things and curse and scream and slam doors and retreat into music and come out the other side without judgment. But deep down, he was still waiting. For a voice. A car pulling up. A return. It never came. Even when he turned 16. Even when he graduated high school. Even when he won that small scholarship and made a speech that brought half the room to tears. Megan didn't send so much as a card. Some part of him still held out hope. I knew that. I saw it in the way he checked his phone on his birthday, pretending not to be disappointed when there were no new numbers. I heard it in the way he asked about my parents but never about hers. I felt it in the silence that followed every milestone, always that breathless pause, like he expected something to change. But nothing ever did. And still we kept moving. Because that's what survival looks like when love is uneven. You keep showing up. Even when it's thankless. Even when you're invisible. Even when the child you've carried for over a decade still sees you as the man who just filled the gap someone else left behind. You keep showing up. Until one day they stop looking behind them to see who's still there. Sometimes, blessings arrive quietly. No parade. No warning. Just a flicker of something new where the silence used to be. That's how it began. Noah was 20, working part-time at a local print shop while taking online courses in design. He didn't talk much about his plans. That was always his way. Keep your dreams zipped up until they either collapse or grow teeth. He'd sit in his room for hours, hunched over his desk with headphones on, surrounded by sketches, clay mock-ups, digital prototypes. I knew better than to knock unless it was about food or fire. I paid for the software, the hardware, the fast internet. The little things that don't look like sacrifice unless you're the one working late shifts to afford them. And then, without fanfare, one of his projects went live. It was a concept for a virtual design suite, something he had pieced together during the slow collapse of his sophomore year. No marketing, no press release, just a quiet upload to an international development platform. I didn't even know he'd posted it until I walked into the kitchen and found him staring blankly at his phone. Hands shaking, face white as flour. I thought something was wrong. Maybe something with school. A bill. A rejection. But then he whispered it. Someone bought it. Bought what? My work. The project. Private fund. They just wired it. 7 figures. The number hit the air like a window cracking. At first, I thought he was exaggerating. Misreading. I asked if it was a scam if he'd double-checked the name. He just slid the phone across the table. I saw the email. I saw the numbers. I saw the wire confirmation. And then I saw the name at the bottom of the message. Megan. No subject line. No greeting. Just 4 words. We need to talk. Mom. It had been 13 years. 13 years of birthdays missed. 13 years of photos ignored. 13 years of absence so loud it rang through his every triumph like an off-key note. And now a message. I remember the way he looked at the screen. Not shocked. Not angry. just hollow. Like her reappearance was some ghost he had always known would return the moment there was something worth stealing. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. By noon the next day, she was in town. She didn't come to the house. She came to a meeting. Legal. Controlled. Cold. The kind of meeting where the air smells like paper and sweat and posturing. She walked in with a man in a navy suit. Not a day over 45. Eyes dead behind expensive glasses. Her attorney. And her shield. She hadn't aged the way I thought she would. I expected ruin. Decay. A woman worn thin by regret. But no, Megan looked rested. Composed. Like someone who had left her grief behind and replaced it with something sharper. She smiled when she saw me. The kind of smile people wear in courtrooms and executions. "Noah," she said, all warmth and teeth. "You look just like your father." "Not me. Him." The words curled in the air like smoke. Noah didn't respond. He just sat still, his hands folded. A tightness in his jaw I hadn't seen since the night she left. The lawyer took over, papers, proposals, language bloated with false concern. But the core was simple. Megan wanted access, authority, influence. She used the phrase blood right. She said she understood he had experienced a difficult upbringing, and that she was ready to reconnect, to reclaim her maternal role now that he had come of age. She didn't say money. She didn't have to. She said it without saying it. With her posture, her practiced affection, her sudden interest in his health, his future, his legal framework. Her way of using the word "we" when she talked about decisions she hadn't been part of in over a decade. Then came the sentence. I've played it over in my head 1,000 times, each syllable like a stone against my ribs. "We follow our real father's rules. You don't matter." She said it without blinking. No venom, no fury, just fact. As though the 13 years I carried that boy, fed him, protected him, guided him, were irrelevant. As though the title of father belonged only to biology and not to sweat and years and scars. She didn't mean Noah's biological dad. That man was long gone. What she meant was herself. That she was reclaiming command. That I was just a placeholder. And then she smiled. Slow. Precise. Like she had finally maneuvered the last piece into place. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break. I turned to Noah. I saw the shame in his eyes, the way he stared down at the table like a child again. And I answered quietly. Then let him take responsibility. No threats. No arguments. Just the truth. If I no longer mattered, then I no longer owed. She thought it was a bluff. That I was bluffing. She didn't know me at all. When we got home, Noah didn't speak. He went to his room. Closed the door. I heard the sound of keys tapping through the walls for hours. That night, I shut down every account tied to me. Phone plans, software licenses, emergency credit cards. I removed my name from the file systems. I signed off from the management accounts for his design. Quietly, completely, I left behind a single message. Let your real father handle it. His reply came at 3:14 a.m. One line. He doesn't exist. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. Out of clarity. He needed to decide who he was. Who she was. Who I was. I couldn't make that decision for him anymore. And then the pressure started. Megan sent letters. Emails. Thin threats with expensive headers. Legal demands dressed as concern. She wanted access to the financial structures. She claimed Noah wasn't capable of managing his affairs without parental guidance. Her lawyer sent warnings. Claimed I had overstepped for years. That I'd misrepresented my role. That I had manipulated the situation. Tried to paint me as an interloper. But Noah dismantled it all. He had already transferred ownership to a third-party fund. Independent. Bulletproof. I hadn't known. He'd done it after the first lawyer's email arrived. On his own. Without help. Without hesitation. Then he demanded an open hearing. No secrecy. No deals behind doors. He wanted the truth spoken plainly, publicly. And he got it. Megan's case unraveled. Every claim fell apart under cross. Her lawyer stumbled. Her voice cracked. She tried to paint herself as a mother returning from hardship, but the records told the story. No visits, no calls, no support. The court dismissed her motion with prejudice. Noah's composure never broke. When we left the courthouse, he didn't celebrate. He didn't cry. He just sat beside me in the truck, staring out the window. At one point, he said, "Thanks for letting me do it my way." That was it. That was everything. We went home, quietly. No champagne, no shouting, no victory dance. Just the sound of tires against asphalt and the hum of the radio playing something neither of us really heard. Only then did I understand what had changed. He had made the decision I never could. Not just to reject her, but to choose me. Not with words, with action. And sometimes the coldest answer isn't a scream. It's a door closed correctly, a title unsigned, a future sealed without the people who abandoned you. He chose who mattered. And for the first time in 13 years, I didn't feel like a ghost. The moment we returned home from court, I knew something had shifted. Not in the air, not in some mystical way. It was in the weight of the keys in my hand. In the sound the front door made when I shut it. In the way Noah walked past me, straight to his room, not slamming the door, not speaking, just closing it with care, like he didn't want to disturb something fragile. Or final. The house had never been noisy, but now it was still. Not peaceful, not tense. Just drained, like it had bled out everything that once gave it shape. I didn't follow him. I went to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and stood by the sink for a long time, staring out the window into the dark. The porch light flickered. A moth bumped against the glass again and again, too stupid to understand the barrier. I wasn't angry. That's the part no one would understand. I wasn't bitter. Not in the way they expect. I felt nothing. That was the horror of it. No relief. No triumph. No fear. Just absence. A kind of interior winter where the ground doesn't thaw and the trees forget how to bloom. I had given everything. I had nothing left to give. So I acted. I shut down all remaining access. Noah's name was now his own. His accounts, his business registrations, his software stacks, all previously entangled with my personal identity, were severed, burned clean, replaced with new credentials. Not out of spite, out of necessity. He was no longer a boy. He was a man standing in a room his mother had lit on fire, trying not to choke on the smoke. And me, I was just the man who carried him out of it. I pulled out a small and used notebook from the drawer. One I'd bought years ago for jotting bills, grocery lists, contractor quotes. I opened to the first page and wrote, "Let them own what they asked for." It wasn't a warning. It was a record. That night, I wrote down everything Megan had once left behind. Receipts, medical visits, missed birthdays, late-night fevers, all the moments she wasn't there to witness, and all the ways I filled the silence. Not for revenge. For clarity. Because I knew what came next. Megan didn't go quietly. She never intended to lose, not really. Court was just her first move. Her lawyer sent one last letter. Thinly veiled. Your ongoing presence in his affairs poses a liability. You are not legally entitled to continue managing assets or communications on his behalf. Any continued involvement may result in formal review. I read it with coffee in my hand. Didn't even finish the cup. It wasn't about legality. It was about rewriting history. Erasing the part where I raised a boy through the worst decade of his life and replacing it with a more acceptable fiction. One where Megan had simply struggled and reconnected, and everything in between was just unfortunate paperwork. So I withdrew. Not just legally, physically, emotionally, completely. Noah noticed. He didn't ask, but he felt it. He always did. When I stopped reminding him to eat, he noticed. When I didn't check if he was getting enough sleep, he noticed. When I passed him in the hallway without asking how the new prototypes were coming along, he noticed. One night, he caught me just as I was heading out. "You're not going to ask about the meeting?" "What meeting?" "With the new fund rep." I shrugged. "Didn't know you wanted me to." His face tightened. Not with anger. With confusion. Like someone who'd touched a light switch and found nothing behind it. "You were always part of it," he said, quieter. You handled everything. Since the beginning. I said. That's the key word. He didn't speak. He just stood there, watching me pick up my keys, my coat. The same coat I wore to parent-teacher meetings. To late-night emergency rooms. To long drives when he needed to clear his head and I was the only one with a license and the patience to keep the radio low. He said one more thing as I reached the door. You're still here. I turned to him, the knob cold under my hand. I'm not sure I am. And then I left. I didn't go far. Just the edge of town. An old motel with paper-thin walls and a mattress that bent in the middle like a spine that's given up. I didn't need comfort. I needed distance. Space to uncoil everything I'd coiled tight inside myself for 13 years. I turned off my phone. Left my laptop in the truck. Just sat on the edge of that mattress and stared at the blank television screen for hours. Not because I was watching anything, but because it felt like looking into something that finally matched me. The silence was different here. Not wounded. Just empty. Back at the house, Megan was clawing at the edges of Noah's life. She sent messages now, longer ones. Claimed she was misunderstood. That she'd been scared. That she'd left to protect him from a version of herself she didn't want him to see. That motherhood had never come naturally. But she was working on it. She talked about healing. About building forward. About making things right. She never said she was sorry. That was the piece she could never touch, the weight of apology. Because to apologize meant acknowledging the years she'd fled. The years I'd worn her absence like a coat I couldn't take off. The years Noah spent looking out windows that never opened. And Noah? He was steady. Scarily so. He answered when he had to. Refused the rest. He didn't tell her to go away. He let her twist. He let her try. But he never gave her what she wanted. He never called her mom. I came back after 3 days. Not because I was needed. Because I had to see the house again. I had to know if it still felt like mine. Didn't. Everything looked the same. Keys in the same bowl. Lights timed the same way. But the center had shifted. The gravity of the place. I walked through it like a man visiting a memory that had already decided to forget him. Noah was on the porch. He didn't ask where I'd gone. He just nodded toward the chair next to him. I sat down. We didn't talk for a long time. Just listened to the wind move through the branches. The creak of the boards under our feet. The occasional car rolling past the corner. Then he said, without looking at me, "She offered to buy me a car." "What did you say?" He shrugged. "Told her I already had one." "You don't." "No. But I didn't want hers." That meant more than anything he could have said. But I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about gratitude. It wasn't about debt. It was about a boy finally understanding the cost of loyalty. And the silence that follows betrayal. I stopped being angry a long time ago. Anger requires heat. Fire. Hope. What came after Megan's return? After the courtroom, the letters, the slow, deliberate withdrawal wasn't fire. It was frost. A stillness that settled over everything. Not dead. Not broken. Just finished. Noah stopped talking about her. Not in defiance. Not in grief. She simply evaporated again, but this time not by choice. This time he was the one who turned away. She tried for a while. Called once a week. Left voicemails. Sent articles about design trends. Saw this and thought of you. He never responded. Eventually she stopped. And that silence? It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like someone dragging a body out of the water and realizing too late it wasn't breathing anymore. Some nights I'd find him sitting at the kitchen table long after the lights should have been out. Laptop open. Glass of water untouched. He wasn't working. Not really. Just staring at code he'd already perfected. His hands didn't move. I didn't ask what he was thinking. Because I knew. What do you do when the person you waited for your whole life shows up not to love you, but to claim you? What do you do when the man who stayed, the man who held your sickness and failures in silence, finally steps back, not out of rage, but because he's too tired to keep proving he belongs? You sit with it, and you try to figure out what part of your identity was ever yours to begin with. I watched it happen, not all at once, but in waves. The slow shedding of illusions. He threw away the shoebox. The one with her photo. I didn't say anything when I saw it in the bin, face down under orange peels and crumpled receipts. But I noticed. It mattered. He moved the photo of the two of us, the one from his high school graduation, to the mantel. It had been on his desk for years. Dusty. Unspoken. Now it sat where people could see it. Centered. Framed. But he still didn't call me Dad. And I stopped expecting it. One evening we sat on the back porch. Quiet. A little cold. I had poured us both coffee. More for the ritual than the warmth. He was staring out at the fence, like it had something to say. Then he asked, without turning his head, "Did you ever feel like I wasn't yours?" I didn't answer right away. I didn't want to give him something clean. I wanted him to hear the cost. "Every day," I said. "But I acted like you were anyway." He didn't nod, didn't flinch, just sipped the coffee and let that truth settle between us. That was the closest we ever came to reconciliation. And maybe it was enough. But Megan, she wasn't done. She waited 2 months, then filed another claim. Not for custody, not for access, but for damages. Said I'd profited unfairly from Noah's success. That I had manipulated familial ties for financial advantage. That I'd exerted undue influence over a vulnerable youth. She knew the case was thin, knew it wouldn't hold. But it was never about winning. It was about dragging my name through paperwork. About making me flinch. She failed. Noah filed his own response. Independent counsel. Statement of record. He used the phrase, "my chosen parent." In print. Legal language. Public. And still, I didn't feel vindicated. Because she wasn't the only one who'd left marks. I had my share of silences. My moments of coldness. Nights I shut doors too loudly. Days I ignored his confusion because it looked too much like her, and I couldn't stand to see her reflected in him. I wasn't perfect. I was present. There's a difference. The claim was dismissed without hearing. Megan's attorney didn't even show for the final review. She disappeared again. This time I didn't expect a return. And yet, 3 weeks later, a letter arrived. Handwritten. No return address. She didn't even use his name. Just son. The contents were exactly what you'd expect. A soft apology wrapped in hard excuses. Lines like, "You'll understand when you're older," and "I did what I thought was best," and "You were never meant to be a mistake." Noah didn't read it. He burned it. In the sink. No drama. No speech. Just fire. I watched the flames chew through her script like it was nothing. It was nothing. And still I stood there, waiting for him to flinch. He didn't. He just turned to me and said, "I think I want to move out." I nodded. I figured. He was 21 now. Self-sufficient. Quiet. Clean. He had inherited my stillness, but not my weight. I was glad for that. I didn't want him to carry what I had carried. He found a place downtown. Nothing fancy. Clean floors. Big windows. Walls he could decorate with his own things, not memories he didn't choose. I helped him move, but not all the way. I carried 2 boxes, then let him take the rest. That was important. That was the final handoff. When I left him there, standing in his doorway, surrounded by cables and boxes and coffee mugs, I didn't say goodbye. I said, "You know how to reach me." He nodded. I always did. That was it. I drove home, alone again, back to the house that had been mine before it was ours, and then somehow became hers, then his and now mine again, but hollow. The porch creaked the same way. The keys still fit the lock. But something was missing. I stood in the living room, staring at the blank spaces on the walls where his artwork used to hang. I tried to remember what the house looked like before him. Couldn't. He had rewritten the space. And now it waited to be rewritten again. The days passed. Quiet. Structured. I went to work. Ate alone. Cleaned things that didn't need cleaning. The silence didn't hurt, but it also didn't soothe. It just was. Then one Sunday a letter arrived. Not from Megan. From Noah. Typed. Minimal. Just a few lines. "I don't know what father means anymore, but I know what you were. You were there. When no one else was. That counts for something. I hope you're okay." And I didn't reply, not because I didn't care, but because he wasn't asking for an answer. He was giving one. That night I sat in the kitchen, the same table where I once taught him to balance a checkbook, where he once said, "Do I have to call her mom still?" And I said, "Only if you want to." I sat there and asked myself something I hadn't dared ask in years. Was it worth it? All the years, all the sacrifices, the nights I swallowed my pride, the mornings I forced myself to smile when I felt like a ghost, the money, the exhaustion, the loneliness, the rejection. Was it worth it? I don't know. What I do know is this. He is standing now. He is no longer waiting at windows. He is no longer flinching at the mention of her name. He chose who he wanted to be, not who biology demanded he become. That was never my goal. But it is the only thing that feels like a result. People talk about legacy like it's blood, like it's name, like it's something you pass down through DNA and property. But I think legacy is quieter. I think it's a man sitting in his kitchen, alone, reading a letter from a child he raised into a man who never called him dad, but never needed to, because presence too leaves a mark. And sometimes the deepest kind of love is the kind that never gets named. So I ask you, if you were me, would you have stayed? Would you have endured the silence, the contempt, the erasure? Would you have waited until the end, only to walk away empty? Or did I become what I always feared? Not a father, just a man who waited too long to stop giving.